Hi, everyone. So, I sometimes like to think about consciousness as a concept, and recently, with advances in AI, this concept has been coming up a lot in the zeitgeist. So, I think I'm going to just share two thoughts I've had about consciousness, and I promise only the second thought really has to do with AI. Um, I'm not trying to offer a formal proof. I'm not trying to really persuade anyone that much. I'm trying to offer points of discussion. So let me know what you think. Let's get started. The first of these two thoughts I'm going to call increment or switch. That's the title here. So if you look on Wikipedia, there's all sorts of terms for theories of the mind. You got like dualists. I don't know. There's a lot, right? I think what it all actually really boils down to is either you're going to think that consciousness is explainable via physical mechanisms or not. And so, what I mean is, if you think we could fully understand the processes in the brain, and that includes like quantum physics, things that are maybe non deterministic, um, then we could explain all conscious experiments. So, one thing maybe I'll direct you to is Mary the color scientist. You can Google that phrase, Mary the color scientist. So, for example, if you could learn everything there is to know about how we see and perceive the color red, how it comes into our brains, how it's processed by our neurons, gets to our frontal lobe, what have you, we would know why when I actually look at something that's red, I experience it as this color, which seems to not really be explainable via words or anything else besides just seeing the color red. Um, so, to back up, I'm going to call people who think that if you can understand everything about the physical brain and what's going into it, and that explains consciousness, those are type green people, right? And then people who think that there's something else, maybe there's some mysterious factor, right, besides the physical world, that needs to come into explaining consciousness. We're going to call those type purple people. So for everything else in existence, I'm like a solid type green person, right? Uh, you know, think of some usual things like the origin of life, right? I think if you can explain how like these first reproducing cells came about, you have some molecules. I don't know anything about biology, right? But if you can explain physically how some molecule can duplicate itself, um, that's great. I don't think you need anything else like coming into that to explain it. When it comes to consciousness, I don't buy it. I'm not really sure. I think consciousness is fundamentally different than like anything else. Um, so again, type green is you think physical understanding can explain everything. An implicit assumption I think is made by type green people, um, is that consciousness is going to emerge when the complexity, with the complexity of a physical system, it emerges or grows. And this is a necessary stipulation if you're going to say that a pebble is not conscious, right? Like, if you're going to say a pebble has low physical complexity compared to something that's conscious, well, you're saying like somehow the complexity plays into the level of consciousness, right? Um, so my challenge to this is I'm going to ask you, I'm assuming you in particular, watching this, are a type green person, and you're saying that consciousness is tied to physical complexity. I ask you, is consciousness like a dimmer switch? Does it get brighter and brighter as complexity grows? Or is it more that like a flip switch and consciousness flips on when some level has been reached? So let's look at both of these options, right? So if we're going to say it's a dimmer switch, to me, it seems like being conscious is a binary thing. So one example is we can question: is a frog conscious? Is a honeybee conscious? You can think up some ladder of animal complexity, right? So a frog might have different sensory experiences if it is conscious. Certainly would have different intellectual experience if it is conscious. But the question of if a frog is conscious comes down to if a frog is having experience at all. So even if a frog can't grasp like counting up to 2, right? There would still be something that it's like to be that frog if it's trying to keep track of things at all, and it's experiencing that in its mind of like, hey, something's there and something's not. So I'm not sure, to me, I understand a concept of something being less conscious or more conscious than something else. There is either consciousness or there is not consciousness. And there's aspects to that consciousness. It's not a spectrum of consciousness. So the dimmer switch concept doesn't work for me at all. Let me know if you want to convince me. Like, go ahead. I'm really into it. Number 2. So let's say there's a flip switch. You reach a certain threshold of complexity, and consciousness flips on. So, first question here: how are we going to measure this complexity? What's our unit of complexity? And maybe there is a way to formalize this that's not specific to a physical substrate, right? So if we don't want to limit ourselves to like number of neurons, that seems very specific to a human brain. Maybe it's like, well, we could look at graph theory, right? Maybe it's the number of connections you have. Even that probably is not enough, right? Like you could have a linked list. You got a billion connections, but they're all in a straight line. Maybe there's like some kind of structure you need to have. I'm gonna get a little like loose. I'm gonna get vague here, I think intentionally. Like imagine you have a structure, and I'm gonna say like your structure needs to have a certain depth to it in some sense. And like maybe it's you have a meta thing, right? Like on each layer you have n of your unit, right? And then I don't know. I'm not even making sense at this point, but you get why this is a tough question, right? So, like how do you even formalize what's the point where this consciousness is flipping on? Who knows? Even given you're able to define this unit, it seems to me like a really hard sell to say that there's like a point here where consciousness will flip on. So, here's my challenge question. Like, would it be possible scientifically to determine which minimal set of neurons? Obviously, you could determine some set of neurons. You could just, get rid of the whole brain, right? But like, what's the minimal set of neurons you can remove to remove consciousness from a person? And like, think about this. Without this minimal set of neurons, like what is the mechanism of action this minimal set of neurons is doing that produces consciousness? So this is kind of the end of the first thought section. Again, I'm not trying to offer formal proof. I want to stimulate discussion on this topic of consciousness. And also, again, I'm not particularly claiming any of these are really original ideas. Look up, I think it's called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Thomas Nagel discusses, I think, very similar concepts, but not identical concepts. So I'm going to move on to the second section here and get to talk about AI. So I'm sure everyone is excited to talk more about AI right now. Personally, I do lean towards the feeling that our current AI, our large language models, are not conscious, but I slightly rankle at a particular argument I've encountered of why they are not conscious. That goes like this. So, sure, AI is more than just a superpowered autocorrect. It does have some concept, has a model of how words relate to each other and how, even things that are represented by these words relate to each other. And it even might have some concept of how words might capture mood, and that mood might convey a meaning that isn't explicit to humans, or we aren't consciously aware of, but like the connotation of a certain a word might hold some meaning that it can use in its responses, things like that. At the end of the day, it has no sensory experience, it has no grounding in reality. So it might be aware of the conceptual richness of a phrase like the red apple. It might know that red is a color, apple is a fruit. There's a lot of poetic implications for red and for apple and the combination of red apple, things like that. But it's never seen red. It's never tasted an apple. So it doesn't know what those mean. And in this argument against why it's conscious, let's extend this past an apple. We're going to talk about morality, what's good, bad, happiness. This AI, this large language model, it's never experienced happiness. So it might know the word happy relates to a lot of things. It knows happy is an adjective for sure. It could probably hypothesize on if a certain scenario presented to a person would make that person happy or not, given like facts about that person, facts about people in general. But it's never been happy itself, so it doesn't actually know what happiness is. It just knows happiness is happy is some set of tokens. Maybe there is just a token for the word happy in the data it's fed. So it's not conscious. It doesn't actually know what happiness is. Like, it doesn't know what any of these concepts it has. The set of relations in its model is. It's not conscious. My problem is, I think this is a circular argument when we take humans into account. So we're going to think about it like a large language model. What's the input to that, and what's the input to a human, and what's the input? So the input to a human, like we have our, it's our senses, right? So We get our ears, eyes, nose. It's not first grade again, but you get the idea. So when we're eating an apple, we're like, we're gonna bite into it. We get some taste stuff from our tongue going into our brain. We're seeing the color red. We took the bite. Oh yeah, we got a bite from the apple. Um, so, but it's all just data, right? Like it's just data going into our brain. I don't really see a convincing difference between the data going into a large language model and the data getting into our brain from our sensory organs. Uh, like, you know, I could probably, not me, I couldn't do this, but theoretically, in like 50 years, right, we could take all the data that's getting gathered by our sensory organs before it gets to our brain. Let's say we like insert some sensor in our ears, our eyes, our mouth, our nose, any other senses too, right? And then we're gonna collect that. We're gonna feed that into like some AI model as like this is the input. Um, that's just data. So I don't know how that's different from like what we're giving a large language model. I mean, like, I do see how the large language model is just words, but maybe words, like, what's the difference in a collection of some senses between, um, like, those are just, like, concatenated together, right? Maybe I'm making less sense here, uh, saying it out loud. No, I still think it makes sense. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it. Let me know if you know what I'm trying to say, and you can phrase it better. Anyways, I do think this argument is circular, uh, and because the thing is, as like humans, as a human, we already know we are conscious. Um, we already know that the models we're building in our brain, or at least we think the models we're building in our brain, um, are based on like the grounding factor of our senses, and really that's the grounding factor of our consciousness. Like our senses form the basis of our consciousness. We think that light entering our eyes grounds the redness of that apple to reality. Like we think that the data of our eyes feeding us that, like, this is red, is grounding us to some concept of redness. And we think that is more grounding to the concept of redness than the word red entering a large language model. But for us to accept that this large language model or any AI is conscious, it's like we're like, well, we got to prove that this thing is conscious before we accept that it is grounded to consciousness. So like even if we have some AI that's using a camera, like maybe even in real time somehow, we would be like, hey, but like it's just processing the data from this camera going in. This is just like an array of pixels. It's just some numbers getting fed in. It's just looking at numbers. How does this? It doesn't know this corresponds to reality in some way. But like, you know what I'm saying? It's the same as our eyes. I think my powers of explanation were slightly worse in the second half there, but I still stand by what I said. So, in conclusion, these are two of my thoughts are on the topic of consciousness. I'm going to label them Number one, that was about it's really about the hard problem of consciousness, particularly like is as complexity increases in a physical system, is consciousness more like a dimmer switch that consciousness goes up as the complexity increases, or is it like a flip switch? At a certain point of complexity, does consciousness turn on? And why I'm skeptical of a little bit of both of those options. Second topic is about how I think we have a double standard when it comes to if we're willing to ground AI consciousness in the inputs to its system versus willingness to ground human consciousness to the inputs to the human brain. Those are the two topics. This is probably a pretty dense video, but that's what I want, you know? So let me know what you think. I would love to have some discussion, some rebuttals here. So that's me signing off. My name is Sam. See you later.